Hello everyone, hope all of you are doing well. Welcome to your biology class. Students, today we are going to start a new lesson, chapter number 22, Humans and the Environment. In this chapter, you may find about following: number 1, agriculture and food production; number 2, habitat destruction; number 3, pollution; number 4, conservation. So let's discuss about first what does environment mean. So students, in your previous classes maybe you studied about this term, but this is a review for you. Environment refers to the surrounding of the living species, which including both living and non-living. Or the environment means natural world and its surrounding, for example the air, the water and the earth. So students, our natural environment consists of land like soil, water which includes river, lakes, seas, ocean, ponds. Atmosphere include weather, climate and temperature changes. Also living organism like animals and plants. Hey students, humans always interact with their environment. So let's discuss about the human environment system. The human beings, plants, animals and other living beings work in the environment, or they operate the environment actually. So there is a close relationship between living organisms and their environment. So the branch of science which actually deals with this relationship is called ecology. In your previous class you studied about the whole chapter which is actually based on this term. So what is ecology? Yes, the branch of science that studies the interaction between organisms and their environment. Hey students, the interaction of living beings, including human beings, bring changes in the environment. Similarly, living beings, including human beings, also display changes within them when the change with the change in the environment. So it's mean human environment interaction explains how man affects the environment, and in return how man gets affected by it. Students, this chapter is actually based on this human environment interaction, that what humans did or do with the environment and in turn how they get affected it. So students, today in this video we are going to discuss the first topic of this chapter, that is humans and agriculture. Students, most of the world's supply of food is produced by growing crops or by keeping animals. And during the last century, the quantity of food produced has greatly increased because the world's increasing population needs to be fed. So it is important that we increase the quantity of food that we produce. So there are several ways in which this has been achieved, or we can increase the food production. Number 1, by using agricultural machine. Number 2, agricultural chemicals. Number 3, inorganic fertilizer. Number 4, selective breeding. So let's discuss one by one each method. So students, the first method is agricultural machinery. Students, agriculture machinery has made a very big difference. Like with this machinery such as tractor and combine harvester, one farmer can cultivate as much greater area of land in a much shorter time than using the manual labor. So this is the first method to increase food production. Secondly, agricultural chemicals. Students, farmers also using agricultural chemicals to help to improve the growth of their crops so that they can get more yield from the same area of ground. Students, agriculture chemicals include like insecticides are sprayed on crops to kill insect pests that might reduce the yield or make the crop look less appealing to the buyers. On the other hand, herbicides are also sprayed to kill weeds. And what are weeds? You know very well that which compete with the crop plants and reduce their growth. But keep that in your mind, these all agriculture chemicals are quite expensive and the cost is outweigh. So, by the increased quantity and quality of crops. Yes, so the third way is to increase food production is inorganic fertilizers. Like chemical fertilizers are add more mineral ions, like for example nitrate ions, so which help in the plant growth. On the other hand, NPK fertilizers are also available. So these nitrates or NPK fertilizers can increase the plant growth so that the soil if the soil do not contain enough of them. So these inorganic fertilizers supply all these nitrates and NPK fertilizer. So the fourth method to increase food production is selective breeding, and you had this concept because in reproduction in plant you studied about this selective breeding process. Actually, what happened in this process that the breeder can select the plant or an animal which have shown the good characteristics, and they allow them to breed, and in the offspring or in the next population they see the characteristics of their choice. So selective breeding is also played a very important role in increasing world food production. And you already seen many examples that how the breeder can choose parent organisms and generation after generation to produce new and improved varieties of or no, new organisms like plants or animals. Like for example, wheat plant modern wheat plant produce far more grain per plant than older ones ever did because of this selective breeding process. And one other advantage of this selective breeding is that it also has to produce crop plant that can grow in poor soils, like if less nutrient is there, so these plants can grow well. Or secondly, they are also resistant to diseases, so this is also the advantage of selective breeding. So students, let's discuss about the monoculture technique, which is usually used to increase the quantity of food. So crop plants which are usually grown as large areas of a single variety, this is called monoculture, or in other words you can say monoculture is the cultivation or growth of a single crop on an agricultural or forest land. But this monoculture technique has some positive or negative impact on the environment, so let's discuss about them. So students, let's discuss about the positive impacts or advantages of monoculture. So the positive impacts of monoculture are listed below. That is, number one, specialized harvesting technique. So the farmer can optimize his operation by cultivating the same species in monoculture and giving them the same growing requirements, planting, maintenance, like including pest control and harvesting, like the same machine can collect all the crop. So all these things will be the same across the farmland in monoculture, and this also helps in a greater yield at lower cost. So this is the benefit for the farmer. So the second positive impact of monoculture is highly selected strains. It means like varieties of plant with desirable characteristics can be matched to the conditions. Because monoculture can take the advantage of the local climate and soil conditions. So crops that are best suited for the land can be planted so that the soil and climate like wind, droughts or a short growing season does not have any effect on the crop yield. And again, this method helps to maximize the efficiency of farming process. And number 3 is minerals and water requirements. Like throughout the year, scientists can work out exactly what the crop needs, and the farmer can make sure that they use it properly. Because monoculture technique is very simple, and for the farmer, what is also appealing, like the apparent simplicity of a monoculture, and it is much easier and straightforward to cultivate one kind of crop, like in terms of knowledge and experience needed to do it successfully. Because same kind of a crop need same minerals and same water requirements. So also this is also the advantage of using monoculture technique for the farm. So students, let's discuss about the negative impacts or disadvantages of monoculture technique or farming. Number 1 is damage to the soil. Students, you know that in monoculture farming, one type of crop is cultivated, usually in an intensive manner and on a very large scale. So growing the same crop year in year, so it could deplete the valuable soil nutrient that plants rely on. So this deficiency is usually compensated for by using increasing amounts of fertilizer. So this is the disadvantage of monoculture technique, that it can cause the damage to the soil, and also in order to compensate this problem we have to use the increase the use of fertilizer. Let me give you one example, like students in United States, corn, wheat, soya bean, cotton and rice, these crops are usually grown using monoculture technique. So the same mineral will be drained away by many copies of the same plant. So as the crop is harvested and taken away, the mineral will be lost from the soil. So this is the disadvantage of monoculture technique. So the second disadvantage of monoculture technique is susceptibility to pest or spread of disease. Like with monoculture technique can lead to an increase the population of organisms that are pest of the crop. Like for example, leaf hoppers feed on the sap of rice plant. So and it usually reduce the crop yield. They also transfer plant viruses to the rice, which cause serious disease in the plant. So think about it, if a large area of land is just covered with the rice plant, then the leafhopper have so much food available to them, so their population can become increase enormously. So students, it means that monocultures are more susceptible. Susceptible means means sensitive to certain weeds and insect pests, which means that pesticides are used to protect against. But weeds and insect pests can spread faster in monoculture because of the lack of biological diversity. Like same type of organism is there, like same type of plant, so same type of organism can affect them. So when one plant is susceptible to a pest, it means that all other plants of the same species are likely to suffer from it. So this is the big disadvantage for the farmer who rely on one crop for their income. If something goes bad, the entire yield can be affected. So the third negative impact of monoculture is resistant to pesticides. Because a student farmer can try to reduce the quantity of pest by spraying insecticide on their crop, and it is also quite very expensive. Like for example, in many places they used insecticide to kill leafhopper, and as a result what happened, leafhoppers have become resistant because of continuous exposure to the insecticides and are no longer killed by them. And on the other hand, the effect of both pesticides and high use of fertilizer or increased use of fertilizer on health and our environment are well known, because these chemicals finding their way into the groundwater sources and in the air, where they created further pollution. So this is a very big disadvantage of monoculture technique. So let's discuss about the fourth disadvantage of monoculture technique, and its loss of biodiversity. So let me give you one example, that in the above point I mentioned that the farmer used pesticides to kill leafhopper, because leafhopper usually feed on rice plant. But you know what, the high use of this pesticide not only kills the leafhopper but also other harmless insects, including predatory insects and spider that would help to reduce the leafhopper populations. So in addition to the environmental and health risk of monoculture, monoculture favors only the cultivation of specific crops. So it means that there is more limited options for the consumer. And at the end what happened, these monoculture farming practices are impact on planet's biodiversity, like the variety of animals and plants. So these are all the positive and negative impact of monoculture farming. So students, there is no straightforward solution on how to keep all the things good about monoculture and eliminate its negative impacts. But there are increasing call about to introduce more regularly the practice of crop rotation. So what is crop rotation and how it increases the soil quality, we will discuss in the next slide. So students, let's discuss about what is crop rotation. Crop rotation is a practice used in farming, and it involves the planting of different seeds on the same land in different times of year or seasons using a set pattern. This technique is usually helps replace the nutrients in the soil for the plants. Like for example, the types of root that can be rotated include cereals and legumes. Number 2, deep rooted and short rooted. See the example below. So in this example, follow usually rough grass and weeds, which usually consist of grazing for cattle and food shelter for wildlife. So students, a fallow field is the land that a farmer plow but does not cultivate one or more seasons. The purpose of this is to allow the field to become more fertile. So next is a root crop, which includes potatoes and carrots. And the purpose of these all root crops that they need potassium, but they do not need much nitrogen. So next they cultivate legumes, which include peas and broad beans, because these legumes can increase the nitrogen content of the soil, because these leguminous plants have bacteria on their root nodules which can take nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil, so that other plants that require nitrogen can use it well. So you remember in nitrogen cycle we studied about this nitrogen fixation bacteria. Yes. So then they grow cereal crops, which include barley and wheat, because these crops is a good rotation for breaking disease and weed cycles. On the other hand, barley in the initial stage for growth, they require nitrogen. So think about that. After leguminous plant, if the farmer grow these cereal crops, so they will get nitrogen easily, because a legumes plant have bacteria on their root nodules, and the bacteria on the nodules take nitrogen from the air, fix it in the soil, so that the other plants that require nitrogen can use it as well. So in this way all the process of crop rotation happens. So crop rotation actually helps to enhance soil quality and resilience to pests by having different crops grown on farmland. I hope you understand it. Yes. So students, let's discuss about the benefits of crop rotation. So students, as we discussed before in monoculture technique, that planting of the same crop type leads to depletion of specific nutrients from the soil. But in crop rotation, each crop type has a different nutrient interaction, right, with the soil, and they each release and absorb different types of nutrient. So because of this crop rotation, it increases soil fertility. So crop rotation increases soil fertility by controlling deficiency or excessive nutrients, because it replenish or providing nutrients that are not available or absorbing nutrients that are in abundance. Like in the previous example we studied about the cereal crops, like barley absorb nitrogen from the soil because of their initial rapid growth, and that nitrogen is actually fixed by which plants? Yes, leguminous plant. So, student, it also increases the soil organic matter, which is caused by microorganism left behind by crop planted. And in the beginning, we mentioned that fallow crops in the example. Yes, so see, these fallow crops is actually animals that also graze on them. So they are adding actually manure to the ground that fertilizes the soil. So biomass left behind when harvesting also improves the fertility of the soil, and it is purely green manure. So the second benefit of crop rotation is reduce buildup of pest. Students, as we discussed before, that similar plants have the same pathogens. Therefore, crop rotation actually break the pest life cycle and their habitat, because these cycles have similar events that happen in a constant rotation. So it means that the infection of pests and diseases happens in a season. So if the farmer is aware of the kind of pests and diseases that break out at a given time of the year, so the crop is not planted on that season. It can plant it into different season. So it means the chances of getting infection is low. And this infestation means that getting infection. So this infestation actually lowers the risk of plant getting infection and equally allows the farmer to grow crops each season without using pesticides, which is good for the environment because it also reduces pollution. The third benefit of crop rotation is reduce depletion of minerals. It means that crop rotation actually allows the land to regenerate or renew itself nutrients without having to apply more nutrients in the form of fertilizers. So leaving the land uncovered for a season allows the land to regenerate the soil nutrients lost through absorption by plants, which is harvested in the previous seasons. Like for example, by planting crops like legumes. So we are able to increase nitrogen in the soil as they contain nitrogen fixing bacteria that fixes nitrogen naturally in the soil. So each crop type actually adds up or absorb different soil nutrients to the soil. So it needs a mix up of variety of plants to make more balanced. So knowing the type of plant to grow after a rotation is crucial important, because it avoid either excessive buildup of nutrients or excessive absorption of nutrients from the soil. So this is the most important benefit of crop rotation. So number 4 benefit of crop rotation is needs of fertilizer. Students, the constant application of fertilizer to soil actually it causes leaching. What is leaching? Maybe you studied in your previous classes. Yes, leaching is the washing away of soil minerals through rainwater, and it causes pollution. So actually, the excessive use of these fertilizer can cause leaching, which is the excessive buildup of nutrients in the soil to a toxic and harmful level that do not allow plants to grow well. And this crop rotation is actually increases the nutrients in the soil, and it allows the farmer to plant crops successfully without the need of applying fertilizers. So in this way we reduce the use of fertilizers and avoid pollution. But students, on the other side of the picture, the crop rotation also has some disadvantage, like it increases the cost of the final product. It means practice of crop rotation is necessary to improve yield, because crops require investment in different planting technique, because each crop cost time and money, because they need a different type of attention. So in this way what happens, the cost of the final product increases. Secondly, it reduces efficiency of the crop. It means improper implementation of the techniques causes much more harm than good if the farmer lacks the technical know-how of the crop rotation. Students, there are nutrients built up that will take a long time to correct in the soil. So the farmer has that skill to know what crops can be planted after the other and in which season for the process to be successful. So if improper implementation happens, so it reduces the efficiency or the quality of the final product. So the farmer very great losses. It means that improper implementation can lead to great losses to the farmer, and it also reduces the efficiency of the crop. Students, in the beginning of the lecture I mentioned that most of the world supply of food is produced by growing crops or by keeping animals. So we are going to discuss about the intensive livestock production in order to produce more food. Students, in many parts of the world, cattle and other livestock are kept outside, and they graze on grass and are fed by people, bringing freshly cut vegetation for them to eat. So first of all, you have to know that what is actually livestock means. Livestock is commonly defined as the domesticated animals which usually raised in an agricultural setting to produce products like meat, eggs, milk, fur, leather, and wool. So in developed countries, livestock are often farmed intensively. It means that in a large number of livestock are kept in an area that would not normally be able to support more than very few small number of animals. So for that matter, farmer uses high inputs to increase the production of milk, meat, wool from his animals. Like for example, the farmer provides high energy foods to feed them, regular medication given to stop the development of diseases, and also these animals may be kept in a controlled temperature building. Why? In order to maximize their growth rates. So intensive farming can help to provide more food. Livestock farming has been the part of human society for most of history. Since ever, humans started domesticating animals to make their life better. On the other hand, the livestock farming involves the rearing of animals for food and other human uses, such as producing leather, wool, and even fertilizer. So this type of farming primarily applies to cattle or dairy cow, chicken, goats, horses and sheep. But now it is also applied on other animals like such as donkey, rabbits and insects. Yes, such as bees, which are now being raised at the part of livestock farming. So livestock farming has allowed goods of livestock to become more widely available and cheaper to buy. But livestock farming, or doing this practice of intensive livestock farming, have had an several occasions given a lot of concern in terms of food safety, animal welfare and environmental impacts. So now we are going to discuss about the negative impacts or disadvantage of intensive livestock on the environment. Students, in intensive farming, the livestock animals are usually kept in a very crowded conditions, so that the animals are more susceptible to diseases. It means they will get, or they are more exposed to the infections. Secondly, it increases the risks of bacterial resistance towards antibiotics, because as I mentioned that in the first point, because of this crowded condition, the animals get infection or are more susceptible to diseases. So in order to ensure that animal do not contract with diseases or do not get diseases, so farmer use antibiotics in the long term to lead, and this thing actually lead the evolution of bacteria and the rise of drug resistant pathogens or drug resistance bacteria. So this is very negative impact of intensive livestock. Another negative impact of intensive livestock is pollution. So you think about that, keeping all these animal in a small place, so the waste which is actually coming from the intensive farming unit, which cause pollution of the land and waterways, because these people disposed animal waste which is not treated properly into the water bodies, and where they pollute the water and they cause threat to the ecosystem's biodiversity. So this is also the big negative impact of keeping livestock farming. So students, research studies have indicated that the fact intensive livestock has a considerable effect on the environment. Like we discussed before, overcrowding of the livestock is another big disadvantage of livestock farming, and it also responsible for causing pollution of water bodies, and it disturbs the biodiversity. And on the other hand, it also responsible for the development of antibiotic resistant bacteria, which is also a serious concern. So this is all about the negative impacts of intensive livestock production. So now we are going to discuss about the effects of all these techniques we studied before on world food supply. Students, it has been calculated that more than enough food is produced on earth to provide every single person with more than enough of their needs. But yet, many people do not get enough food, and many people, both children and adults, die each year because they do not have improper proper diet. Students, 90% of the world's food is derived from just 15 plant and 8 animal species, which include wheat, rice, maize, millet, and sorghum, which provide nearly 70% the food energy and up to 90% of all protein consumed by world's people. Students, the World Health Organization states that there are 3 pillars that determine food security, which include food availability, food access, and food use and misuse. So students, now I would like to tell you about the factors which affect the world food supply. Number 1, unequal distribution. What does it mean? Like some parts of the world produce more than enough food for the people that live there, like United States. And in other parts of the world, now we are near enough food is produced. So food is actually distributed unequally on our planet Earth. Secondly, because of poverty. What does it mean? That large amount of food are transported from one part of the world to other, but still there is no sufficient supply of food to everybody, because the food prices rises too high. So then even if there is a plenty of food around, but many people may not be able to afford or buy it. So this is also one of the factor that affect the world food supply or people health which living in that part of the world. Time famine can also affect food supply. It means that the main cause is weather. Like sometime because of drought condition, if a area suffers drought for several years in succession, so it means that it's difficult for the people to grow crops there, because the soil is not fertile, and also their animals die too. So that part of the world also face scarcity of food. But sometimes the problem is exactly opposite, that because of too much rainfall, so it causes flooding, and again it's also preventing crops for growing. So famine sometimes also responsible for affecting the world food supply. But sometimes what happened, there is enough food, and the weather condition is also good, but the problem is that the population of that particular part of the country or the world is too much, so it also unable to provide enough food for them. But sometime because of war ragging, like in sometime in area prevent people from working the land and harvesting their crops, because some parts of the world are seriously affected by this war ragging, and these people do not even receive supply of food from other parts of the world, and they are only confined in their houses. So these people also face problem in getting food. And sometimes because of diseases, like for example nowadays because of this deadly coronavirus, the world food supply is affected, or maybe definitely affected, because all the flights are blocked by the world, so that the import export of food is also not possible. Students, this is all about the world food supply and the factors which actually affect on the world food supply. I try my level best to cover all the important points which actually um, needed to make your concept clear about the world food supply. I hope you understand it. So this is all about the topic one, that is food production and agriculture. And at the end of the lecture, I hope you understand that how modern technology has helped to increase food production, and you are also able to understand the problems caused by the monocultures of crops and intensive livestock. And at the end, we also discussed about the world food supply, and we discussed about some important points associated with this. So take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.